Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this latest webinar from the Infinetics research team. Today we're going to be discussing SMS and MMS security strategies for mobile carriers. The session today is co-produced with Infinetics Research and Cloudmark. I'm Joanne Emery, the event director here at Infinetics Research, and I want to thank you for joining us. We have a 1-hour webinar planned today with about 45 minutes for the presentation section, and then we're going to follow up with your questions. I want to encourage you to ask questions. Take advantage of our presenters today. So you can ask questions anytime during the session and just enter those in the Q&A box you're going to see on the left side of your console. And additionally, you can download all the presentation slides today by clicking on the PDF in the resource link box right on your screen. And along with those presentation slides, you'll find other white papers related to the discussion today right there in that resource link. And you can download that information anytime during the session. And also, we have a Twitter feed for today's topic. You're going to see that feed running on the left side of your screen, and our hashtag today is #MobileSecurity13. So you can comment, share information with your followers, and tweet right from the webinar console by using that function. So with those basics out of the way, I'm going to start with an introduction of our panelists today. So with us we have Neil Cook. Neil's Chief Technology Officer at Cloudmark, and Cloudmark is a global leader for carrier-grade messaging infrastructure and security solutions. They have deep knowledge on SMS and MMS threats, and they work with communication service providers worldwide to protect networks and subscribers. Neil's responsible for Cloudmark's technical strategy and roadmap, and he oversees Cloudmark's product management, technology services, and sales engineering teams. Neil, welcome today.
Thank you, and welcome everyone on the call.
Great. And with us leading the discussion today is Jeff Wilson. Jeff is the principal analyst for the security segment here at Infinetics Research, and he's our resident network security market guru. Jeff has more than 18 years in data, networking, and telecom, and he has one of the most accurate forecast track records in the business. So Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Joanne.
Great. And now we want to get started with the presentation, so I'm going to turn the controls over to you, Jeff.
Great. Thanks a lot, Joanne. Well, welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Jeff Wilson. I'm the principal analyst for security at Infinetics, and strap in because we have a ton of content to go over in the next 45 minutes, and we're really looking forward to a lively discussion at the end, so make sure you enter your questions along the way, though I will be reminding you. In today's session, what we're going to do is we're going to look sort of at a brief introduction to the issue of SMS spam and threats, and a brief overview of the solutions available, talk about the evolution of the threats from email to mobile, and then look at some really detailed threat and attack data, both globally and in specific regions. Talk about the impact of next-generation networks on SMS threats and security, the impact of messaging abuse on mobile carriers, the real direct impact, and then wrap up with some quick conclusions and a Q&A session. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started here. And, I think the first thing that we really want to start off by saying is, SMS spam is a reality. It's global and it's ubiquitous, right? It's similar in evolution and techniques to email spam. So if you're familiar with the way the email spam market evolved, you'd probably be pretty accurate at predicting what's going to happen with SMS spam. And it runs the same continuum from legitimate advertising to full-blown malware. But no matter what happens, we expect that the users are going to hold their mobile network operator responsible for threats generated over SMS. And this is absolutely bearing out. I mean, if Internet users will hold Google and Yahoo responsible for email spam and a free email service, paid mobile carriers are absolutely going to be held responsible for anything that's generated through SMS. And really all you need to do is pull up Twitter to get a feeling for this. If you're not directly connected to this community, do a quick search for SMS spam in Twitter and see what comes up. Here's one message from an annoyed customer, but there are hundreds of them. every day, and they're in every language from every region from all over the world. And it's not just annoyed customers and the lost revenue from a single customer's switches, or it causes a drain on customer service. It's all the way to being a delivery mechanism for real mobile malware. This is already started. Neil is going to talk in great detail later about Spam Soldier, which was a SMS mobile botnet. But this is a real issue that runs the full gamut of problems, the same problems that we saw in email. So, in theory, there's really two ways we can go at combating this problem. The users or the network operator or device manufacturer can look to protect the device, right? You can add something to the device, a piece of software or whatever, and say this is a user issue, this is a device issue, we'll protect it here. Or you can install various degrees of protection in the mobile infrastructure. In truth, as with most security systems, the real world solution is going to be a multi-layered solution, defense in depth, with protection in the network and on the devices, and a real important piece being the communication between the network and the device, like the GSMA spam reporting service, for sort of a real-time sharing of information between users and the network infrastructure. So looking at those two types of solutions, on the device side, there are specific spam blocker apps. There are multifunction mobile security clients. There are secure messaging clients that handle all of your messaging, in addition to adding a layer of security on top of those. And since I've been searching SMS spam on Twitter nonstop for the last couple of weeks, even as of yesterday, there was a lot of excitement for people who installed iOS 7, the ability to add block lists in iOS 7 to block individual users, which solves part of the problem, but as we've all learned with spammers, addresses and numbers change constantly. Attackers are constantly moving around, so static blocking of a single number only helps so much. So that's on the device side. Users will have a range of options. They can install themselves, or the network operators can pre-install software on a device to add a layer of security. And there are both enterprise and consumer-grade products here. On the infrastructure side, there's really kind of two classes of solutions. SMS firewalls, which really deal with kind of the bulk spam-only problem, and then multifunction messaging security platforms that handle SMS spam, but also layer the ability to inspect content and to manage security for other messaging platforms besides just SMS. Because as we'll see when Neil talks about the attacks a little bit more, the evolution of attacks is absolutely going to go the same direction it went on the PC, which is attackers are going to leverage multiple vectors. We're going to go from SMS to email. We're going to go from email to SMS. We're going to use the web. All of these things are going to be leveraged. So if you're really just only looking at SMS traffic and not inspecting content, you're really limited in what you can find as a long-term security solution. And we believe ultimately, regardless of whether we think the user should install their own security client and manage security for themselves, the network operators have to take responsibility. On the left side, what we're actually looking at here is our forecast of the revenue for infrastructure solutions, gateway solutions for messaging security, and it's a massive growth that we've projected, but from a pretty small base in 2012. We're right at the beginning of this market. A lot of carriers around the globe haven't even started making serious investments, haven't made their first real technology acquisitions here yet. But we expect, between now and 2017 and really over the next couple of years, a huge ramp in making these investments for these reasons. You have to protect your users. You have to improve customer satisfaction. You have to reduce churn as a carrier. These are, fundamental basic business requirements. The solutions that are available can reduce traffic on networks and save money, and Neil's going to talk about that a little bit later, about generating revenue and reducing losses. Enabling clean marketing channels. Email still is, and SMS will be used to deliver legitimate marketing. And in some regions, this is much more common than in others. But if that marketing channel can't be trusted, no one will use it. There's a real requirement to mitigate regulatory intervention, and this is also something that Neil will talk about in more detail. And then when we talk later about the impact of next-generation networks of LTE and 4G and LTE, protecting against the threat of over-the-top, the threat that over-the-top messaging poses to SMS revenue. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Neil, and he is going to talk about the evolution of threats from email to mobile.
Thanks, Jeff. So if we look at where this all started in the email world, today about 95% of all the traffic that we see on email is malicious. It's spam makes up, nuisance advertising, unsolicited bulk email makes up a great majority of it. You've got a smaller amount of fraud, and particularly increasing is phishing, particularly spear phishing and those kind of attacks, which can address quite small groups of users. And then malware as well. Malware used to be delivered over email. Typically these days, it's used with links to malware sites, which download malware to your computer or indeed smartphone. We're seeing an increasing amount of malware being targeted to smartphones through email as well as through SMS. And as Jeff said, these mediums now are being sort of utilized across the board. And then a small amount of good email, 5%. What's interesting about this, though, is that most of this gets filtered out. Companies like CloudMark, other companies are available, do filter out the spam, so you only actually see quite a small percentage of the actual spam getting through. What you see with mobile is that the volumes have really started to ramp up over the last few years. We estimate around 210 billion spam messages were sent last year, of which there are around 50 billion variants. So you can see they only use the same message about 4 times. And this is coming from a variety of sources. This is obviously just SMS spam, but you get dedicated SMS spammers who will use contract SIMs or prepaid SIMs to send spam out. You get people using SIM boxes, which can also be used to do voice fraud as well, and sort of cheap voice calls that typically get used as well to send spam from SMS. And then something new, which as Jeff said I'll talk about later, is mobile botnets starting to appear, which is very concerning because they change the economics completely, makes it go from very cheap to free effectively for a spammer, which is where most spam is coming from in the email world. Now what's interesting about this is that only about a few percent in most countries of the SMS traffic is spam. But because there's no filtering going on in most networks, very, very few networks have implemented filtering or content inspection, then the effects that get through to the end user are typically about the same as email spam. In other words, people are seeing the same, if not more, spam on their mobile phone than in email spam because there's no filtering. So if you look at why this sort of phenomenon is moving from the traditional techniques into mobile, there's a few reasons. Economically, most of this stuff is driven by economics. These people are business people. They work on pretty slim margins, and so they have to do this stuff as cheap as they can. And what's happened is over the last few years, SMS particularly, the messaging plans have become unlimited or very, very high rate bundles. So the per message cost has really dropped off a cliff. It's also favorable for a spammer to send to mobile devices because mobile devices have typically the users have got a billing relationship with their mobile operator. So you can send a message that entices you to call a premium rate number or send to a premium rate SMS shortcode, for example, and they can make money off that directly without even having to sort of try to defraud you by taking to your website or whatever. And then, of course, there's a lot of OTT services now which allow you to send to SMS users completely free or very, very cheaply. So we see a lot of spam coming from the OTT world, virtual numbers, etc. Secondly, I think subscribers are much, much more trusting in their operator and their mobile phone network generally. There's a lot more reach for SMS than email. Everyone's got a mobile phone pretty much now. It's being used for things like banking and billing updates and all those sort of things that people do with it. And because people trust it, it also has a much higher open rate. Even if you send a spam or some kind of social engineering attack that's trying to put malware on your phone, people would tend to open it, and only afterwards would they recognize that it was a bad message. But then there's a few percent of people who don't recognize it are going to get affected by it. Whereas an email, about only 20% of all emails are ever opened. So the difference for the spammers is huge. And then finally, as we said earlier, there's very little mobile filtering going on today in networks. Very few operators have implemented filtering. So this is a great opportunity for the spammers at the moment, because the door is effectively, if not wide open, it's certainly open enough. And the defenses that are deployed today are generally quite unsophisticated. So I'll hand back to Jeff. I think he's going to do a quick poll question.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. We're going to break up the talking here a little bit to ask the audience a question. And this is for the mobile carriers on the line. The question is, are you interested in deploying SMS security solutions for your users or network in 2014? And with the main options being, client, we're going to deploy client solutions, we're going to offer infrastructure solutions, or we're going to look at both. So we'll give you a few seconds here to answer. And I'm going to remind you that if you haven't started submitting questions yet, to please remember as we're talking here to submit questions. Neil's just about to launch into a really great discussion of the specific threat data that CloudMark has gathered from around the world. It's a really interesting discussion, and I have a feeling it's going to generate a lot of questions. So make sure you're submitting them into the Q&A panel while he's talking and while I'm talking later. And with that, I will go ahead and take a look at the results of the poll so far. So looking at the results here, we have about 40% of the people who answered the question saying they're looking at infrastructure solutions and 30% looking at both infrastructure and client. So I think we're kind of all on the same page here in understanding that this is really an operator issue, and this is an issue that's probably going to have to be solved in the network. I agree with that, and I think CloudMark agrees. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Neil so that he can go ahead and dig into all of this threat data.
Thanks, Jeff. So we are looking at initially what the regional effect of spam is. Spam is an SMS is a global problem, but it's worse in some places than others. So if you look at this kind of hot map of the world, if you like, the two biggest hotspots that we see are China and India. China and India can be anything from 30 to 50% spam on their networks, which is extraordinary, really, if you think about it, compared to a lot of countries where it's less than 5%. And a lot of things we've talked about in terms of economics are the reasons why that's the case. A lot less broadband usage, so spammers never really were that big in email, so they really just went straight to mobile. But a huge problem there. But other countries where it's a big problem still, Indonesia, Russia, the Russian republics, North America is actually has a big problem, and then some of the South American countries, particularly Brazil. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the sort of trends that we see within each of the individual countries that we've talked about, and then I'm going to classify some of the different types of attack that we see, just generally sort of classify some of the attacks. So if we look at the US first, this highlights a general trend that we do see in mobile spam and mobile malicious abuse is that you get a lot more fraud and phishing attacks. I think one of the reasons is that the volumes aren't so high, so a lot of these guys are trying to monetize what they do much more effectively. Therefore, things like phishing and fraud can be you get a much higher return on your investment, particularly because people trust their mobile phones so much more. They're much more susceptible to phishing and social engineering attacks. So in North America, we see more than 25%, and this is not just a sort of snapshot this week, a high point. We've seen for nearly a year now where about a quarter of all of the SMS spam that we're seeing in North America is bank account phishing. So that's a huge, huge problem. Very, very worrying for operators as well, because if people are getting phished and they're blaming their operator and they're losing money from their credit card or their bank account, then obviously that's extremely concerning. A more recent trend has been a lot more adult or pornographic spam. Again, and that's been a trend in email for a long time, and that's really sort of come up on the rails recently. And then there's just a lot more sort of junk, win-free stuff type spam. If we look at India, India is interesting because it's really, really high volumes, but it's mostly nuisance advertising. It's people advertising 3G cards for one of the networks in India, like Bharti Airtel, offering massages or real estate leases, these kind of things. We've seen a recent trend for stock spam being propagated from SIM boxes, where they're trying to pump and dump cheap penny stocks. So again, the very big reach, the reach of this in India is one of the reasons why this has become effectively the de facto marketing tool. And the people mostly spammers are not using legitimate marketing channels that are provided by the operators. They're using cheap SIM cards to send this stuff out, which is why it's such a problem, because there's no regulation and it's affecting everyone. The UK is quite interesting. The UK has been pretty severely hit by the worldwide recession, and we've seen there that the UK kind of lags behind the US a little bit in terms of some of the trends that we see. One of the trends that we have seen is that in the US, payday loan spam used to be a big, about 30% of all the spam messages that we saw. But the US economy has recovered, and we saw that really drop off. The UK, the economy is only just starting to come out of recession, and so we're still seeing a lot of payday loan spam. So that's really interesting in terms of, if you're running the economy in the UK, you can have a look at this and say, well, it's still not doing so well. And then a lot of other scams, again, typically sort of just nuisance advertising or people trying to sell you things like in compensation scams and those kind of things. So China is, it's one of the superpowers like the US, and interestingly, very, very similar statistics in terms of its spam metrics. Phishing around about 25% again. So, phishing, I can't highlight this enough. Mobile messaging is not, when we talk about spam, we're not just talking about nuisance advertising, we're talking about some potentially very malicious things. And phishing is extremely malicious and extremely worrying. So, phishing is actually the highest category in both China and the US, even higher than just general nuisance advertising or marketing. So now I'm going to have a look at just generally classify the different types of attack that we see. So advertising is still, in most places, if it's not the top, then it's generally second or third highest type of spam or malicious stuff that we see. So typically, this is an example from Brazil. It's typically affiliate driven. So you've got affiliates who are they're using affiliate marketing programs to drive traffic to often legitimate websites or businesses. But the spam itself is being sent in an unauthorized and unwanted, unsolicited manner. And they're trying to market goods and services. So this is just an example of car loan spam from Brazil. And we see examples like this all over the world. The fraud and phishing stuff is interesting just because if you look on a mobile device, we've already said that it's very trusted by users typically still. And there's also not much screen real estate. So if you get an SMS message like this one that's in Cyrillic, we've translated it below, that says, your bank card is locked, please ring this number. A lot of people are just going to trust that and assume that message is from their bank. And people don't realize that this has gone out to thousands of people. They think it's specifically targeted at them. So that's a big issue. And we see the same kind of attacks in Russia, in China, in the US, and around the world. And these are very, very similar to email, except, as we've said, that typically people trust it more. And also, typically in the mobile spam, you see phone numbers get used more often in phishing attacks as the call to action rather than a website. We see about 75% phone numbers being used as the call to action rather than a URL. So a couple more examples. Cross-regional attacks, this is definitely a worldwide global problem now. So spam doesn't just originate in the country that that you're located in. It can come from other countries if it's cheaper to send from those countries. So we see problems like Australia getting spam from the UK. And then, of course, malware is becoming an increasing problem. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the spam soldier malware that we discovered at the end of last year. This was really the first Android botnet that we saw outside of places like China and Russia. A lot of malware in China and Russia, mainly because of the issue of there's no Google Play stores there. But even in the West now, we're starting to see botnets. Spam Soldier was the name that was kind of generally given to this, and it was really interesting because it used a couple of different techniques. It pretended to be a game. In fact, the initial propagation messages, which was very ironic, were actually offering people an SMS blocker, saying, "Are you tired of spam?" Which is pretty ironic, given that this, once it gets on your smartphone, is actually going to send spam to people. So clearly SMS spam is a big enough problem that the bad guys are using it as a social engineering technique to get you to download malware. But the later pictures were actually promising a game, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Need for Speed and things like that. Once you actually installed this on your computer, then obviously it hid itself. You didn't really see, you still saw the game, but you didn't see the fact that there was a bot running on your smartphone. And then what it was doing is it was trying to propagate itself, so sending messages out, getting people to download more copies of the virus, and then it was also sending out a ton of spam. So a lot of affiliate program spam, and this was a true bot because these spam messages the text of the spam messages were being sent from a command and control server, which was being contacted by the bot, and the list of phone numbers to contact was also coming from a command and control server. It wasn't just coming from your user's address book. In some cases, we saw up to 16,000 messages sent from a single phone with this bot. And this had a pretty big impact. It affected one carrier in particular. About half of all the infections and messages that we saw were sent from one particular carrier, but it did hit all of the carriers in the US and peaked at around 4 to 5% of all the spam that was being sent during the couple of weeks that it was active. But CloudMark and quite a few other companies and the operators, we worked together and we shut it down. So in the end, there were only about 20,000 infections. But this is just a good example of what's to come. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Jeff.
Great. Thanks a lot, Neil. That's fascinating stuff. Actually, I got a call yesterday afternoon from a reporter from the Dallas Morning News. They're running a story about recent SMS spam targeting Dallas. And the more he was really interested in the motivations and, why SMS and the techniques that people use. And the more I explained to him, the more terrified he got. And I think by the end of the call, he just wanted to turn his phone off and throw it in the trash. So, obviously that's a bit hyperbolic, but it is interesting to see how the average users respond to this kind of threats on their phone, particularly, as you said, because this is a trusted device. And SMS messages are trusted, and the whole goal in any spammer's life is just to get you to open the message. And as you pointed out, that happens a lot more frequently when we're talking about SMS. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about next generation networks and threats. Talk about what's coming up as we move to the next generation of networks. And the starting question is, so what's stopping carriers from having the ability to provide the best, the most secure messaging experience for their users? We think it's because there isn't a single point of control in most mobile networks for messaging, spam, and security. There's no one place to go to sort of get a great view of all the messages that are flowing across the network. Users, reputation, numbers, content, and distill all that into this is a good message, this is a bad message. We believe that SMS firewalls can help part of the problem to deal with message volume cost, but they don't do anything for the higher layer security issue or for any issues beyond SMS. And they don't get involved in over-the-top messengers or instant messengers or the transition from SMS to email or the web. And as you see, this is exactly what the Spam Soldier example shows you. This is exactly what's coming. Email spam taught us that controlling volume ultimately was the easiest problem to solve and maybe the least important. And if you look at email security solutions, previously anti-spam solutions, they don't really talk about spam at all anymore. They're mostly focused on protecting from higher layer threats. And messaging is much more than SMS. And I think a really important lesson, and anyone who has a mom or a grandma who's gotten an iPhone recently and you use it, and if you're an iPhone user and you use iChat with them, users don't distinguish. The average user doesn't distinguish between what's an over-the-top messenger, what's an instant messenger, what's SMS, as long as the message goes through. And we're really starting to blur the lines between different types of messaging applications. And there's no one single place to gather information, security information from all of those messaging tools. So obviously we're going to talk about next generation networks because that's important, but it's also important to talk about the current and previous generation networks. And so one basic supposition that a lot of people have, or there are really two. One is that SMS is dying, that we don't need it anymore, and the other is that once we have LTE and 4G and beyond networks everywhere, this is all going to be handled, right? Well, we'll talk about the second part later, but SMS revenue contribution remains steady. This is our forecast of SMS revenue. It's on the left-hand chart. It's the yellow section in the middle. It's not growing rapidly, but it's also not eroding. It's staying fairly steady through 2017. It's a fairly big chunk of mobile service revenue overall. And the 2G, 3G subscriber base, although, again, not growing anymore, is still massive. And those users using old feature phones or don't have access to the latest and greatest smartphones are going to continue to use SMS. And that's why you see some of the regional trends potentially being hotter in areas where there's a lower penetration of next generation networks and next generation devices. But once we do get next generation networks and devices, that means the problem is solved, right? I don't think so. I don't think there's any evidence really that next generation networks have the promise of comprehensive integrated messaging security, a solution that addresses SMS and MMS and email and IM and over-the-top messaging apps. IMS, which is being implemented in a lot of next-gen networks, opens up security holes in LTE through APIs, creating routes for attack. But it's going to be embraced, and it's going to be a building block for RCS and voice over LTE. And for RCS, and we're already seeing rich communication services being deployed by mobile operators now, there's nothing in the RCS spec that addresses security at the application layer at all. And regardless of all of this, users are still going to blame the carrier when their OTT messaging app, their rich communication service communication tool, deployed by the carrier or downloaded and installed and used by the user, they're still going to blame the mobile network operator. It's just a fact of life. Services like Join from Orange is just really the tip of the iceberg. Users are going to love these services, but they absolutely pose risks. So looking a little bit deeper into how LTE networks impact security, the first thing they give you is more bandwidth, more capacity, enabling DDoS, spam relaying, other capacity and bandwidth related attacks, and reducing the cost of sending spam. The move to an all IP network moves us into an open environment, open protocols, increased vulnerability to threats, easier to hack than an SS7 controlled network. That evolving hackers, right? All of these tools and techniques that hackers are applying to threats propagated over SMS are informed by 20 years of hacking networks and 15 years of email spam attack techniques, and all of that is going to be injected directly into SMS. And you're going to discover some new techniques that leverage specific vulnerabilities in SMS. These users are much more skilled at IP attacks, so when we open up to an IP network, it becomes much simpler for them to adapt something that they've done already into an IP environment. They're absolutely attracted to the scale and the scope of the environment. And now, once we do have all these data-centric connected devices, pocket computers, that users use exactly the same way that they use as a computer on their desk, then the opportunity to steal all the same information, to use all the same techniques exists. They can be hacked, they can be spoofed, they can be used to run, they're powerful enough to be used to run botnets. So opening us up into a world, an IP world with high bandwidth and rich devices just creates kind of a secondary internet of computers that just happen to be computers that can be carried around and are always connected. And so, this presents serious challenges. How can mobile operators stop new spam and attacks? We got LTE, we got more spam faster than ever. How can they fight next generation threats? Absolutely going to be dealing with blended threats, SMS to email, mobile app to SMS, mobile botnets, the application layer attacks. Attacks always move up the stack. I mean, even in DDoS right now, the real focus from a threat research standpoint and the worst attacks are high layer application layer attacks, not brute force network layer attacks. How can they protect across multiple protocols? LTE, MMS, IMS, over-the-top messengers, VoIP, social networking, mobile to mobile coming along. So you're going to have to figure out a way to bridge all of those protocols and messages that go back and forth across them. And how can you manage the threat from over-the-top players? This is an interesting point that we haven't really talked about yet, which is every time somebody gets an SMS spam, it's a reason for them to dump SMS and to just use an over-the-top messenger as much as possible. So with that, I am going to kick it back to Neil, and he is going to talk about some specific examples of impact on carriers of messaging abuse, spam, and malware. So go ahead, Neil.
Thanks, Jeff. So if we look at the impact of all of this that we've been discussing on mobile network operators, I think there's three main areas. There's potential revenue loss from these activities. Carriers are not necessarily getting the full value of the messaging that they should be getting, particularly marketing and advertising messages. There's brand damage. This is exposing their subscribers who can become very unhappy, and there's potential media implications. And then regulators can impose controls and fines, which of course cause a lot of problems. In the UK, there's even been sort of questions in Parliament and some of the committees in Parliament around SMS spam campaigns by various consumer watchdogs, etc. And then it can also, of course, increase operational costs with customer call and churn, etc. So if we look at some specific cases of revenue loss and how operators can lose money from this, one case is termination charges. Operators pay each other for messages they deliver. If operator A sends operator B a message, it pays operator B a few pence or a few cents or whatever for that message. If most of those messages that are being sent from operator B, or a large proportion of those messages are being sent, are only going one way because they're spam, so they don't get replies, and they're being sent from a very, very cheap mechanism, typically prepaid SIM cards or sometimes contract SIM cards, and they've only received a fraction of a cent per message, and they're paying a few cents per message, then obviously it's an imbalance, and they're going to lose a significant amount of money. So if you look at some just kind of rough back-of-the-envelope calculations, for an operator with only 16 or so million subscribers per year, you could be losing up to $4.5 million every year just on the termination costs that you're paying to deliver spam versus the actual revenue that you get from the people sending those messages. So that imbalance can be fixed by filtering out mobile-originated spam. Another revenue loss area is grey route traffic. So a lot of people they don't want to send. They want to send the cheapest way to an operator's users. So rather than send through the operator's standard marketing approved channel for wholesale messaging, which has a particular cost per message, they might send through a third party which uses some pirate broker, which basically uses usually international SMSCs, often open SMSCs, which can send to the operator much, much more cheaply. Often they don't actually have a termination charge agreement with the operator. So all these messages are coming into the operator and not getting billed, or getting billed very, very small amounts. So it's great for the company sending all that marketing messages, not so good for the operator who's losing potential revenue. So again, if you can find that traffic, detect it, and block it so you can move it onto a legitimate marketing channel, you can save a lot of money. And again, almost $5 million, again, for just not a huge operator here, 16 million subscribers, just through being able to block grey traffic. And we've worked with quite a few operators in being able to do that, and have been very, very successful. And they were concerned that this revenue would just be lost entirely, but that's not the case. It does move on to a legitimate revenue channel. So, we talked about the problems of brand damage and regulatory intervention, and certainly we've seen that that's a big problem. In India, which does have a huge spam problem, the TRAI, the regulator, has issued 4 or 5 different edicts over the last few years, causing operators to put in more and more onerous protection into their network. And this costs a lot for the operators to do, and it's very, very damaging for them. Same in China, and even in the US now, the FTC is getting involved with the free gift card spam, which was very prevalent over the last couple of years. So if you look at what we think is the best way to address this, really we think that the best way to do it is with a multi-tier solution. There's no magic bullet to stopping spam or abuse. There never has been, and there never will be. You're looking at a combination of techniques. So the first technique that you're looking at is the kind of stuff that Jeff talked about earlier, like SMS firewalls, so network level protection. And these are the things that are putting the basic sort of volumetric defenses in, stopping SS7 spoofing and faking, and some flooding, and that's sort of taking out some of the easy to detect and sort of network level problems. The next solution, sort of defenses in the network, if you like, are, and we have a platform called CloudMark Security Platform which addresses this, is sort of more sophisticated and is able to look at multiple different messaging protocols, but it's also looking at things in a different way. So you're looking at sender reputation. So you're looking at what's the behavior of senders on my network, whether they're on my network or from other networks, and looking at what their behavior is and tracking that behavior and seeing where they are violating policies or potentially exhibiting behavior which is suspicious. You can stop particular types of messages, like the cast and null recent attack, which found out a way to find the encryption on SIM cards, those kind of things. And of course, you can do per subscriber policies for things like blacklists and whitelists in the network. And then the final thing is content inspection, where you're looking at the actual content of the message, and that's more like a traditional spam filtering solution, which CloudMark has as well. And then finally, this is just sort of an architecture diagram that just shows how we look at solving this problem, and we look at this through having a solution which is a multi-protocol solution, which is able to look at different types of traffic, but analyze it in a unified manner. So you can see here we can look at IP, SMS traffic, SMTP traffic, SMTP traffic, MMS, RCS, but look at it all in a unified manner so we can see the same kind of behavior across multiple protocols and platforms. And that's really, really, really important to be able to have this unified view of the traffic going over your network. So if someone's spamming in SMS, you don't want them to suddenly, you shut them down there and they suddenly start spamming in MMS because you haven't shut that channel down, you haven't put any protections in place. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jeff to wrap up.
Great. Thanks so much. Another interesting set of data presented. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on conclusions here. I think we've made, hopefully, our points pretty clear here. It's a real problem today. The spam problem is here, but the true security threat is going to be the much harder problem to solve, and that was definitely a lesson that we learned in email. Operators will be held responsible for threats that originate or terminate in SMS and MMS, and they're going to also be held responsible for threats that originate in email and IM and over-the-top messengers, as unreasonable as that sounds. So a long-term solution needs to address all attack layers, multiple messaging platforms, and all types of content. And I would love to hear from the audience if you agree or disagree. If you have any other questions, we've had some people submitting questions along the way, but now's your chance to submit more questions. We have about 15 minutes left excuse me, for Q&A, and we'd love to have some great questions, so start typing now. And I'm going to hand it back to Joanne, who's going to do a couple of quick housekeeping items while I go through the questions that we've received so far. So go ahead, Joanne.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Neil. Some really good information there. I know, like you said, there's some questions coming in, so this is the time to start entering the questions if you have any from the audience. We also want to have a survey. I'm just putting that in front of you now. Just want to get your feedback on this webinar and on future projects that Infinetics will be doing. So we appreciate your joining on. Again, you can download all the slides from the webinar today right in that resource link, and you can also get the backup material on the topic right in that resource link as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jeff, and Jeff and Neil are going to attack some of the questions here, some of the questions from the webinar. So Jeff, back to you.
Great. All right, Neil. Looks like we have a few specific questions for you, so I'm going to start hammering away. The first one we want to ask is if you can talk about spam reduction achieved by implementing CloudMark filters for mobile operators that you've worked with. Are there any case studies, or is there any specific data that you can talk about, or even some general comments you can talk about?
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I don't think I can give specific names on this webinar, but I can talk in general terms. So we're working with some operators in India, and recently we had a look at the effect. We're implementing network-wide filters in their networks, and we had a look at the effect that the solution had once it was deployed on the complaints that these guys get through the regulators. The regulator sends the operators a report every day and the number of reports that they're getting. And we saw that before they were getting 500 to 600 complaints a day, and now they're down to about 10. So that's over a 95% reduction. So if you take that as a sort of general metric, then that shows the the kind of impact that you can have on an operator's network. Similarly, as I was mentioning earlier with grey route traffic, we're working with an operator in Southeast Asia, and they saw, I can't give the exact numbers, but they saw a big increase once we started detecting and blocking traffic that was coming in through grey routes. They saw a big increase in the amount of paid-for traffic that was coming in through their advertised and approved A2P messaging channel. So yeah, again, that's a slightly different use case because it's not so much about overall spam reduction, but it is about revenue increase. So as I said, they were very concerned that this wasn't going to, this traffic was going to disappear. But in fact, it did move on to legitimate channels, and I think that's a really interesting point because it shows that you can drive people towards using this clean channel that you've got once you've implemented spam filtering in your network, and then you can monetize that channel. So that's really showing how you can take this investment, which you could look at as a cost, and you can actually monetize that investment.
Great, thank you very much. Again, continue submitting questions. We have some time left here, so I'm going to go on to the next one. That is, are there any other interesting regional trends that weren't covered in your slides, or is there any region or country upcoming that you think is going to pop up and become an interesting place to keep an eye on that we can cover? This is interesting to me. because of that conversation I had with the reporter in Dallas. They were the people in Dallas were very curious to hear about why Dallas was a specific target in the U.S. And not some other city. But there's got to be some other regional trends that are interesting.
Well, I think the Dallas example is simply what we certainly see that big metropolitan areas get targeted because there's a large number of subscribers there. So you tend to get sort of clustering. And what can happen is if a spammer's using number ranges and they're trying sort of making up numbers, they may pick on an area code. They find they've get good success, and they'll just keep churning through the numbers in that area code. So that's one reason. It could be simply also that people in Dallas are more susceptible to spam, and therefore they're being mined for more. If they find that people get onto a good thing, then they'll carry on mining it. Maybe that's because people in Texas are just trustworthy, honest people. I'm not sure, but
yeah, I didn't want to suggest that they were gullible, but that certainly seemed to be the line of questioning that he was using.
Right, trustworthy and honest is what I would use.
Much better.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a big increase in South America now. That's really hotting up. We see a lot of spam coming in South America, as well as North America actually, but it's generally more controlled in North America through email to SMS gateways. Most operators in North and South America operate an email to SMS gateways. We see a lot of spam coming in through that. And again, it's usually pretty basic or poor filtering on those gateways, which means people get a lot of spam, and they don't necessarily realize it's come into an email to spam SMS gateway. So that's an increasing problem. Also, we see the Middle East starting to really ramp up in terms of the amount of abuse that we started to see. Smartphones are very for a long time have been very big in the Middle East as well. So malware is an area that we're looking at potentially starting to creep up as well in the Middle East.
Yeah, it was interesting as I was doing searching on Twitter. Obviously the complaints that you get are sort of time-based, what time zone you're in when people are chatting. But certainly I saw a lot of Portuguese complaints. It seems like Brazil is pretty hot right now in general. Not only the SMS spam issue, but obviously the announcement yesterday about potentially trying to create their own internet to separate them from the rest of the world, or at least from the United States for other reasons. But lots of chatter in Brazil. How about, are attackers leveraging the same kind of techniques, the event-based techniques that we see in email spam, like natural disasters, tax day, whatever, the kinds of time-based events that drive a lot of email spam throughout the year?
Yeah, they absolutely are. We saw a particular spike in the UK during the World Cup, for example, during the last World Cup. And it was all spiked. It was all targeted around social engineering, trying to get people to click on links that were supposed to be about the World Cup. So yeah, we definitely see that timely, taking advantage of particular times of year or events that happen. Tax day is an interesting one. We actually do some work in a couple of countries with some of the sort of tax authorities who are interested in data on scams, where, for example, people are sent scams over email, but increasingly over SMS as well, where they're trying to basically take your identity and file a tax return on your behalf and claim the tax before you file the tax return, for example. So when we see a big spike in sort of tax-related spams and scams around in the US, but also in other countries around tax season. So yeah, you definitely see that. So I think that's probably an increasing trend as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I was curious about natural disasters, and particularly when we have this cycle of donating to a relief fund directly via SMS. In the week or the 2 weeks following a natural disaster opens up a great attack window where people are not only using SMS but using it to give money freely. So have you seen anything there?
I haven't seen anything like that, actually. Not so much, no. No, not too much based on the sort of giving side of things. there may be a small amount, but we haven't sort of seen it sort of come up to bubble up to our attention as a big problem. So.
Great. So let's see, we have another one. What effect does implementing anti-spam and abuse filters have on operators who have not already implemented a solution?
That's a great question. This is very interesting because we weren't actually sure what would happen when we saw this. When we were deploying the very first time a few years ago in a mobile network, and we sort of looked around and we thought, well, what is the behavior of the spammers going to be when one operator starts to implement it? And we kind of had some theories, and most of those theories actually were correct. And what we saw was that once one operator implements spam filtering and the other operators in the same region don't, the spammers will sit there, they'll look at the economics, they'll find that they might still be able to get some spam through, but they're having to send a lot more spam messages because most of them are getting filtered, and they're looking at this and saying, this is bad economics for me. So what we actually find is the spammers will just migrate to another network. So we actually saw, it was just amazing the difference. We saw this one operator in this particular region that we're working with was really the biggest spammer in that region. As soon as we implemented spam filtering of that operator, the next biggest operator, these guys were the biggest, the next biggest operator within a couple of months then became the biggest spammer in the region. So and they were actually using a different mobile technology. They were a CDMA carrier as opposed to a GSM carrier. So the spammers retooled, if you like, took stock and just moved lock, stock, and barrel to the operator that was unprotected. So, I think the lesson there is if one operator puts this in, the other operators in the region have to move pretty quickly in order to make sure that they don't just become the sort of home base for the spammers in future. So
yeah, and the funnel gets narrower and narrower as more operators get on board too. The load on the leftover operators gets worse. I mean, this isn't unlike lots of things that happen in security. I think people don't realize that that the spammers and hackers are very organized, and they're running real businesses that are fault tolerant. They watch their bottom line, and they're looking for maximum profitability. When we shut down a botnet, spam goes down for a week and then it comes back up. When one provider starts blocking SMS spam, they just move over to the other network. All right, so let's see, we have another question here. When do we believe mobile botnets will become more commonplace? And what do you think that do we think that cybercriminals will use mobile botnets in the same way that they're used in the email space? I think we're going to see more. We're absolutely going to see more, and we've already seen one. I think the behavior characteristics of a mobile botnet are going to be a bit different. Because the device platforms themselves are different, because in the case of Spam Soldier, identifying it and shutting it down, I think, was a little bit faster and easier because it was so focused on one carrier. But we're absolutely going to see more and more every year. I mean, what's your take, Neil?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see more, and I do think that mobile botnets will be doing similar things as they are in the fixed line space. A smartphone now is an extremely powerful computer. I think what has been sort of limiting it is, for example, an SMS. If you send an SMS, it actually takes a couple of seconds typically to send an SMS. So there's some throughput issues that you have. Number one, which just limit the impact somewhat. But I think increasingly these powerful computing platforms that we're carrying, which are going to be connected to increasingly fast, let's face it, just straightforward broadband networks. LTE network is like your broadband network at home, except it doesn't have wires. And so we are going to see a lot more bots doing the same kind of things, sending spam. They're going to be sending spam maybe over SMS, but particularly I think we'll see them continuing to send spam over email, and instead on an LTE network that becomes cheaper and easier and faster to do from a smartphone. They're going to utilize RCS, I think, and other OTT environments because They're cheap and fast, again, to send from, so the economics are favorable. So yeah, they'll be conducting DDoS attacks. You know, I mean, I don't see any reason why that mobile botnets won't evolve to the same level or similar levels of sophistication as they do in the email world. I think the only caveat I would have is that certainly the Google Play and the other stores are doing a reasonably good job at stopping a majority of the bots getting onto the stores at the moment. So you have to do something special to your phone to actually download a virus on the Android platform, for example. So I think that has been one of the things that has helped limit the effect so far.
Great. Well, I think with that, we are just about out of time. We had a few other questions that we weren't able to handle, but we do have the questions and the ability to follow up offline. So we'll go through all those questions and make sure we respond to everyone who asked a question. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the call. The webcast is going to be available on demand for 90 days. Feel free to share the link with anyone who was not able to join the call but who you think would get something out of this. It will be up there for the next 3 months. Thank you, everybody. From myself, from Neil Cook, and from Joanne Emery, I'd like to thank everybody for joining this morning and hope you all have a great day.